So let's now dive into some of the other factors that affect how our organisation is structured, and so what the sort of general hierarchy is or not. So let's get into it. So first of all, we can think of these kind of two ends of the spectrum in terms of how organisations might be structured. We can think of this highly mechanistic, where we've got very rigid hierarchy, everything is kind of top down often. We've got people who've got very fixed duties, so they don't have a lot of flexibility around what they do or how they do it. We've got a lot of rules, very formal communication channels, very centralized decision making. So decisions are made at the top and then they just flow down through the organization. And what we call a taller structure. So ones where we've got, more levels from the top to the bottom of the organization. So we might think of this as a kind of typical old school, maybe a manufacturing company, something like that, would be this more mechanistic type organization. In comparison, we've got our organic organization, which is where we have a lot more collaboration throughout the organization. So it's not so much a kind of, top-down structure, but we've got different people and different departments that collaborate across those departments. People's jobs are more adaptable and responsive to whatever is needing to be done, and they might have a lot more flexibility around both how they go about doing what they do and also what they actually do. Very few rules, so again, people kind of make their own decisions and work out things for themselves. Much more informal communication, so it might be more that people just go, oh hi, go and see somebody, shoot them a direct email, rather than kind of, authoritative dictates that come through the organization. And much more decentralized decision making. So rather than from the top, people are making either their own decisions or decisions at the sort of more small cluster level. And what we call a flatter structure, right? So again, rather than this bosses at the top filtering down to workers at the bottom, our structure tends to be more just distributed across different entities that work collaboratively rather than in that more formal hierarchy. So we think of these as our two archetypes from a spectrum from very mechanistic to very organic. Most organizations will sit somewhere, across that. In the creative industries, we've got a bit of a mix, so and we'll dig into why this might be now. So first of all, we've got these four factors: the actual strategy of the organisation, the size of the organisation, the role of technology within the organisation, and the actual environment that the organisation is working within. So let's quickly whiz through each of these. So first of all, the actual strategy. So we looked at strategy last week. And so depending on what the actual organisation is about and what it's set up to do, it might have a very simple strategy, right? So if we are a band, we might have a pretty simple strategy. We just want to create music and build our fan base and create great music. Yeah. So that might be our simple strategy. Other organizations might have a much more complex strategy, and so that would influence the complexity of their organization. So they might have different geographical strategies, they might have different products, so that they're trying to develop a whole range of different products, which would increase the complexity of what they're doing, which would then increase the complexity around the structure of their organization. Innovative organizations, because they tend to try and be quite lean and responsive to the environment, so they have a more entrepreneurial sort of flavor, they tend to be more on the organic, so much more collaborative structure than hierarchical. And then organizations that have a strategy that's much more around efficiency, so like the McDonald's example that I talked about in the last video, they're going to be more mechanistic because it's all about efficiency and getting the product quality right every time and just being able to replicate the same product over and over and over again. And that's part of their strategy as an organization, is to have that very mechanistic approach that is aligned to trying to be as efficient as possible. The size of an organisation will also affect the structure. So smaller organisations tend to be more organic just because people are doing more things, so they're less specialised. And just the efficiencies that come with, as you grow, require a slightly more mechanistic perspective. And so we saw that with, say, the mushroom group, as they started out as a pretty small, very organic type organization, but over time, as they've grown and they've built their conglomerate of different companies, you can see there's a lot more sort of structure. But what is interesting about that model, both in Mushroom and in the Secret Service group, is that they're trying to kind of bridge this problem that comes with size by having multiple smaller entities, so little sub-companies. They're getting the best of both worlds in terms of maintaining that organic size that enables them to be quite nimble and responsive and efficient at their level, and not having to trade off by having to become more hierarchical, which, as you can imagine, in the creative industries, people are less inclined to want to be in that kind of environment. So it becomes a challenge as you grow. How do you balance off that challenge between being hierarchical and mechanistic versus organic and possibly inefficient? So we then dive into this idea about technology. And so technology in this particular instance isn't so much about like digital technologies, but the actual means of production. And so they talk about these three types of production. So unit production, which is, and I'll give you some examples from the music industry and we'll dive into this in a second. So unit production, we can think of something like a band manager or an artist management company is, you might think of as a unit production type entity, because what they're trying to do is the production of their items, so items being the management service, is done in small batches. So it's much more bespoke and tailored to each band. It's done in that sort of more affiliate way. So it's not like they're trying to manufacture, like mass produce something. So we think of this as very small units of production because it's done in terms of each individual band and that relationship that goes along with it, and being quite flexible in terms of creating the outcome or creating the product. Mass production we can think of as things like, CD manufacture, any kind of digital copying. So we're trying to actually, we're creating something initially and then we're producing it over and over and over and over again. And being able to maintain the quality across each replication of that is mass production. And then process production we can think of as things like a festival is a really good example, because we're actually producing the products as we go along. So, we're producing our program, we're creating the venue, and we're building the site. And then the actual product, which is the festival experience, is pretty much just produced once as a process. It's then experienced and produced, and then it kind of goes away. Any kind of events we can think of as this process production. And we can possibly even think of the record creation process in this way as well, right? So we start with the creation of the song. That song then might get workshopped and arranged, all that sort of stuff. Then we record it, then we master it. Then we actually produce the finished song, and then we distribute it, and then we might do live shows off the back of it. And so there's this continuous flow of products that are being created as a consequence of each step of the way. And so this table kind of digs into how those different factors then affect, so the different type of products affects the structure of the organization. And don't get too bogged down in this, it's not super important, but just in terms of the terminology, vertical differentiation is where we can tell very clearly what the different, the quality of the products, right? So, so if something is vertically differentiated, we know that it's what the quality is like. So an example of that is like how good something is. So for example, in the music industry, we might have different levels of quality in terms of seating in a venue. You know, we've got our general admission tickets and our more highly priced tickets, and then we've got our meet and greet tickets. And so there's a different level of quality that's attached to each of those different ticket prices, for example. Whereas, and then horizontal differentiation is where we can't necessarily determine the difference between the quality of each feature. So some examples here, I say like with a car, if you're choosing a car, like some people will choose a car based on the size of the car. Others will choose the car based on like how grunty it is, you know, the horsepower. Some people will choose it based on the actual brand of car because they have some kind of affiliation with the brand. And each of those different things, you can't kind of say one is better than the other, right? So if I'm choosing a car based on the size of it, that's how I'm choosing it. That's not any better or worse a decision or a different quality than if I'm choosing the car based on the horsepower. Yep. So, and we can think of, so a good example of this is different colors, right? So if we've got the same car, a horizontal differentiation is different colors. And so if I want a white car, then that's fair enough. Whereas if you want a black car, that's fair enough as well. There's no distinction that we can make in the quality between a white car and a black car. So that's horizontal differentiation. And so we can see here that depending on the type of organisation we are, you know, so if we're a bespoke band management company where it's all, you know, what we call small batches, and that's much more relational type organisation, we're going to have a more organic structure. You know, if we're mass producing CDs, we're probably going to have a more mechanistic. And if we're creating something like a festival, or events, or if we're managing a record label with a production process, we're probably going to have a more organic structure and style. And then the environment. So we've looked at the environment in our second module. The more dynamic and uncertain. So we've established that this is the case in the music industry. It's not a very stable industry like banking or education, where, you know, things kind of just tend to roll along week in, week out, year in, year out, and there's not a lot of volatility in the market and uncertainty. We tend to favour a more organic structure. And again, that's where we start. Examples like Mushroom and Secret Sounds or Secret Service have tried to balance this out again. Yeah, so trying to get the benefits of being big, and the stability that comes with being big, but also maintaining that smaller, more organic structure in order to be able to respond to that dynamic and uncertain environment that they work within. So that is our 4 factors that affect our organisational structure, and I'll see you in the next video.